Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM Hangout. I screwed it up right out of the gate. Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. If you want to follow us on social media, we're at SWGM Podcast on Twitter and on Facebook. If you follow us on YouTube, YouTube channel, YouTube.com/SWGM Podcast. If you like what we do, want to get behind the show and support it, feel free to throw us a buck on Patreon, patreon.com/SWGM Podcast. Are you noticing a trend? And then finally, but lastly, oh my God, this is going to be a great show. It's going to be a great show. And last but not leastly, on iTunes, iTunes.com/Savage Worlds GM Podcast. And if you're watching the show live, feel free to participate in the chat. We do bring that into the show and answer questions and make that part of the content of the show as well. Tonight's topic, crimes and misdemeanors. We're going to talk about how you would go about running a crime genre adventure or campaign in Savage Worlds using the new core rules from Suede, as well as some other ideas and stuff. Here to discuss it, Dave, the rules maven. Oh my God, Scott.
You know, at the very best, at least we're not paying by the word.
Holy crap. And Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith.
A whole nickel.
Great pod. Just a great pod.
Just wunderbar. He's a wunderbar.
You know what? At least it wasn't a sight gag. Let's just give him that. It wasn't a sight gag.
That's true. It wasn't a sight gag. All right. So,
gentlemen. Also, I do just want to point out for all of you who keep asking, yes, we are aware of the technical difficulties
with the
causing the podcast not to show up in your feeds, and then all of a sudden you get a dump where like 5 episodes suddenly become available at the same time. We know about it. We're trying to fix it. We've put several fixes in place, and it fixes it for like a week, and then it comes back again. So we'll find a solution, guys. We promise.
So bear with us. You can always, if you can't get a hold of the podcast, you can always just stream it from the YouTube channel the following Tuesday when the episode goes live.
The problem that we're having is that gerbils require more cocaine.
Right.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. Nailed it. All right. So when we talk about crimes and misdemeanors in the context of a role-playing game or an adventure, what are we kind of talking about? Because I kind of want to set the stage, set the table a little bit as far as what we're going to be discussing tonight. And so when we're talking about crimes and misdemeanors, this could be anything from a full-flung mafia game that you want to play, focused on classic, like maybe a Scorsese style mafia game.
Yeah, you've got the jumpstart for Wise Guys just dropped with Suede, and I know the folks over at Just Insert Imagination are looking to get that out. I want to say sometime soon. It seems like from the different dev blogs he keeps putting out. So I mean, you could be playing that absolutely, and that's going to capture that 1970s hip, age of the tippy top of the mafia right before its fall.
Right. You could also be running an Oliver Twist style adventure where you're a bunch of street urchins pickpocketing everybody. It could even involve or devolve into the area of a noir crime investigation, like investigative game where you're detectives. So I mean, there's a lot of ways you can come at the crimes and misdemeanor genre as far as storytelling.
Well, I've seen a lot of people asking, like, well, how would you run John Wick, or how would you run Miami Vice? How would you run? And they name these different properties that all really do revolve around this idea of a seedy underworld or black market that deals with assassins and detectives and cocaine and cops and all sorts of things. And we've got a few different settings out there that do that. Like if you want to run Miami Vice, I can't think of anything better than Tropicana. Like that setting was almost specialty written just for that. If you want to run the Shamoose 1930s-esque thing, Deadlands Noir gives you everything you need to do that. So I think we already have a lot of those tools at our disposal. I think people are just kind of missing out on how to repurpose some of that to either tell the flip side, we're going to tell the story of the player characters being the bad guys, or to take that and change the time period or the location. Like one of the ones that gets asked all the time that I keep seeing pop up is people who want to play the Grand Theft Auto video game as a Savage Worlds game. And one of the things I did, I cut out all the GTA 5 art, made tokens, made a whole backdrop, and then I ran the Crime City stuff that PEG released. And everybody had a good time with that because Crime City lended itself to that GTA kind of high octane bullets and blood style of crime.
Yep. I mean, you could even cross genres with it too. You could do something interesting with it too. You could do, you could set it in Victorian England, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein era, where you guys are investigators and body parts keep missing from a morgue. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. Certain things within Rippers are really kind of crime and misdemeanor type settings, but against the backdrop of a gothic monster being involved in it. So, I mean, there's a wide spectrum and a wide variety of ways you can go with this. I think all of them are going to share a constant current theme parallel through all of it, and it's going to be the demarcation line. Are you the good guys or are you the bad guys? What side of the law are you kind of on in a crime and misdemeanor game? Even if you straddle one or the other, you know,
I think that gray area is one of the funnest places to have your players actually tackle. Is some of what they're doing is bad, so what they're doing is good. You know, they're the Guardians of the Galaxy. They are, you know, showing up because a distress beacon went off, and oh look, there's nobody here to save, so we're gonna rob some shit.
Right. The Firefly, I think Firefly is a great example of what we're talking about, right? Because they're not bad people. They're not evil characters, but they're outlaws. They're not quite on the up and up.
Yeah, Firefly is very much like the Robin Hood story.
Until you get to like Serenity and they're literally robbing a bank. Or maybe in the first season when they're robbing a hospital of all of this medicine that they're going to sell.
They turn around and return. I mean,
yeah.
Fair. Right. My point being that even the bad guys in a lot of situations have somebody else that is their bad guy. And I think that if you're going to be running one of these crime campaigns, you have to have an overarching villain of your story that to someone else is not a bad guy, but to you or to your characters are. And one of the things that I want to bring up is that law among thieves. That I think like one of the issues is that if you're playing in a crime game, you can't go the whole murder hobo route. You have to act with a certain level of social stealth. You can't walk around in body armor with shotguns because your goal is to blend in. If the cops say, oh, well, this guy stands out, then they're going to follow him. I think one of the best movies I've ever seen on the crime genre is Layer Cake. It stars Daniel Craig. If you guys haven't seen Layer Cake, you should go back and watch Layer Cake and then just tell me what you think, because you're just amazed at how he gets over not only on the cops but also on the audience.
So I'm going to throw one out here real quick. So I'm about to do a spoiler alert. We're talking about a Netflix. I'm going to talk about a Netflix original called Polar. So if you don't want that spoiled for you, fast forward to the next 2 minutes.
To be fair, if you're aware of like anything in this genre, you know what Polar is. Polar is not high cinema.
No, not at all. So if you're a fan of Mick G as a director and you kind of dig Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill, you will absolutely freaking love Polar. Here's what I want to say about Polar. I found it to be a very interesting story in a crime and misdemeanors fashion because it's about a professional hitman working for an illegal organization, a black underground organization that pays very well for hits. And this guy is one of the best. He's an older character. He's reached the age of retirement, and he's trying to just get out with his retirement. That's all he wants to do. He's not trying to start any shit with anybody. Listen, I'm going to go to a remote location. I'm going to live my life for the next 14 days until I can collect my retirement. Only problem, spoiler, here's the spoiler part of that. Only problem is the company he works for never pays retirement because they kill everybody before they can retire. They flat out murder them. So
is it a spoiler when they reveal that plot point in the first 5 minutes?
It's still a spoiler. It's still a spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen it. So the thing that I find interesting and like about that is, yeah, he's a bad guy and he's done some horrible shit, and it's going to come back to haunt him eventually in the story. Plot twist. But the interesting thing is it's ultra violent, super ultra violent, but only when he's kind of forced into a corner and they come after him to perform the hit, then it gets super ultra violent. So I think it's a good mix.
They try to show the humanity of the character where he's trying to help innocent people, or he's trying to help his new neighbor, or he's trying to do these little things. There's one in the movie that goes to a really interesting spot where they show him in bed with what they immediately did let you know is a prostitute, and then all of a sudden it cuts to you see her with her kid, and he becomes more of a paternal figure worried about the child while still treating the woman like a prostitute. He's concerned for her child the way a father would be over their own child. And you get this immediate sense that this man truly lived with a foot in two worlds. He sees some people as his colleagues in this underworld and other people as deserving of the proper respect due to any normal, citizen of the world. And it sets up a very kind of complex character, which is something I think you have to have if you're going to run a crime game. Because at the end of the day, if everyone is playing a 1990s era pure evil character, at the end of the day, it ends up not being all that fun. Your characters have to have redeeming qualities. You remember one of the things we said in the past about the villain never sees themselves as the villain. So you have to give your characters a reason not to be the villain in their own story. And that's what one of the things I know with Wise Guys. Eric has said he wrote it so that it can do this lighthearted tone of kind of, the movie about the world's worst criminals, all the way up to like a super gritty tone. But all the while, he's giving you the ability to make those characters more than just a two-dimensional cutout of a cliche monster. And then a great example of that in cinema outside of the Polar reference for me is the movie Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, where you literally have kind of three different sets of villains in this movie, all of which have their own character flaws and personalities and their own reason why they feel completely put out by one of the other villains in the movie, to the extent that you end up really not knowing who to root for through that movie at certain points.
Yeah, and one of the things I really enjoy too, it even goes to a character depth with Polar, where the main character has given up drinking, he's given up smoking, he's trying to live this clean life as kind of an amends, like a self-imposed penance for all the horrible things he does. And they keep showing the thing I found interesting about the film that I really liked is they would zoom in on his eye, and then you would get flashbacks of horrible things he's done based on mundane things that he's witnessing in real time. So it's a great example of running a kind of not cliched crime sort of movie or adventure.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if we go back to the penultimate gangster film, The Godfather, like you sit down with like Don Corleone where he's having the discussion about diversifying the market, and he's like, no, I'm okay with gambling, but no drugs, I don't like it. Like he's okay breaking people's legs and putting chopped up body parts in bed and just like threatening people and shooting people and like putting people in wheelchairs. He's okay with like running casinos, but no drugs. That's how he like redeems himself. It's like,
Right.
no, I don't want to ruin the neighborhood, because that's really, I just want, this guy deserves it for what he's done.
Right. Good old honest work. Honest racketeering.
Honest crime. Always take part in honest crime, because the bad guys do the dishonest crime.
So interestingly enough, I think that's where you can have that fun spot to either run the gray characters, the ones, like a Malcolm Reynolds character. Those types of characters are very interesting. But I think that's also where you can play the dastardly, horrible criminal who still has, a reason not to be the bad guy in their own story. And I will reference a movie that is in theaters without giving you the name or any of the details, but those of you who have seen it will immediately know who I'm talking about. Is you can get a character who is actively doing something that is so debasing of the people around them that you're taking away their dignity, you're taking away their humanity to a certain extent, you're taking away something from them that's their personal property that you're stripping from them, while at the same time celebrating that thing with the other people in your life. Here's this thing that you have that I need, and I'm going to strip it from you while protecting my friend who has the same thing, because it's more important to me that I protect that relationship and we're on good terms than it is to think with a critical eye about the fact that I just did this to a stranger. I can take and rip off a stranger, but a friend I can't steal from.
Right.
So what we're talking about is basically a code, the whole honor among thieves thing. How do you pull that off in Savage World? Simple. Code of honor.
Yep.
Code of honor to work.
Yep. Loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
Would be another hindrance you could put in there. I think that here's one of the things that we kind of want to talk about. So we also, part of the crime drama is also the heist, right? The big planned out heist where everybody sits down. I mean, it's even prevalent in Shadowrun, right? That's what the whole game is about, more than anything else, right?
Yeah. A Shadowrun itself is the term Shadowrun, going on a run, is about doing a heist type thing, and you end up playing the entire game is 90% planning, 10% of your game session is the actual realization of the plan you put in place. And one of the stories that I like to tell in regards to this, and I think you can still find this over on Eric Lamoureux's YouTube page, is one of the first actual plays I had played in as a player. We played a Muppet Sin City mashup that he did years ago, and we did that where he sat back and he let all the role play happen. He didn't stick in, and all the players did this massive plan. And then at the 11th hour, when it goes time to execute it, we execute the first 5% of the plan, and someone just had Savage Worlds happen on a dice roll and took out the big bad, like in a single pop. And it's like, at that moment, everyone's kind of looking around going, okay, so now what? And that was one of those great GM moments, because Eric just rolled with the punch of his big bad being splashed out and pulled a resolution for the rest of the session out of his butt. But it's one of those moments where the heist stories end up almost being this highlight of the part of the game you choose to let be the highlight of it. you might have a heist that's all about dice rolls. Whether you run that as a dramatic task or some other mechanic, where the story ends up being about the big dice roll that happened in the middle of that. Or the story could instead be about the 90% of the session you spent role-playing as your characters, discussing plans and angles and where you were going to go. You might end up with an Ocean's 11 versus an A-Team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's okay, so I mean we're on the topic of heist, so let's kind of talk mechanics with Suede. So the nice thing about the changes of Suede to dramatic task anyway is you can kind of set the difficulty of that task and run it a little bit differently. You can break it into two parts. You can make it to where one part of the team has to accomplish one task and they don't participate in the rest of it, where the other half of the team has to pull off something else. So there's a lot of layers and variety and customization that's been added to dramatic tasks in Suede.
The ability for a dramatic task to officially, rules as written now, reference multiple skills, and to have a limit in place that says rolling all the successes ever in one skill doesn't give you the successes you needed for another skill. So, you might have a 3-round dramatic task, and the second round is a repair roll, but the first round was a driving roll. And for whatever reason, you had the ace take the wheel, and he rolled, 12 successes. But you still need those repair roll successes for the dramatic task to be considered complete. At that point, you really have set a moment up where, the ace still got their moment to shine, but it didn't take away the moment for the gearhead to shine next in that next scene that's going to come up as part of that dramatic task. I really like that fact because while it doesn't steal anyone's ability to still do that big epic moment, it protects the ability for everybody else to have their moment as well.
Right. And the great thing, too, is that even the other player characters in a turn order in that scene can do tests to support. Can do, support tests as well to kind of help that person get the bennies get the success they need to survive the dramatic task. Whether that's distracting an enemy, participating in the repair roll, whatever happens to go down. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of versatility now with dramatic task. And those are a great way to run a heist. And here's the thing I want to really, really reinforce and impart on our listeners. The one thing that I think we tend to forget as role players is this is not it doesn't have to happen in a chronological straight line, compacted time. You could run an Ocean's 11 as a dramatic task over 5 rounds and say you have to get so many of this and so many of that. And that could be 1 week of a guy spent doing, all this stuff to try to find a getaway vehicle. That's his part of the dramatic task, right? And it could take place in week 1, and then 2 weeks later, something else can be happening.
And more importantly, you could even do that by splitting that dramatic task up to a single dice roll at the beginning of each session. And then the session ends up resolving around whatever the result was for that dramatic task dice roll. You have the first round of the dramatic task is session 1. We've got to steal the uniforms or something to do this heist because we're all going to go in uniform. Okay. Well, you make the dice roll on your your research roll, now that it's not investigation, and you find out this is where they are. And now you run an entire session about breaking in, getting those, not leaving any trace that you broke in and stole these so that you can still use them later on. Otherwise, your player characters maybe get caught stealing the uniforms. Now, the next session starts, and sure, they have that success from the previous session for the dramatic task, but they suffer an additional -1 penalty on the next round of the dramatic task, the next, start of the session, because the fuzz are onto them and know that something's going on now that those uniforms have gone missing. You can split that up, and we've talked about doing that in like a war frame when you were doing, Weird Wars, where across an entire, campaign of the war, you're making those dramatic task knowledge battle rolls to be the general leading their troops across Europe and kind of setting the tone of how's the war going as a dramatic task in the background of your game. But you can flip that here and do the dramatic task sets up, well, what's our session tonight about? Oh, well, we were supposed to steal these uniforms and Dave flubbed the frickin' roll, and now we're stuck having to do an entire session about hunting down some uniforms. And how are we going to get them? Because Dave failed to actually get them as part of the dramatic task.
Right. You could also run it as an extended montage as well, right? Narratively, you could say, hey, this is all a montage scene of leading up to the heist. This is getting the car, schmoozing the security guard, whatever that you guys have decided is your plan, could all be run as one montage. It takes place over a month.
Yeah, the
right there at the table
team montage where in 5 minutes they show you a week's worth of the guys turning a bus into a tank. Well, that could be a dramatic task that takes, a few quick dice rolls, and then you narrate how over, 4 days you were able to cobble the thing together. Now, my personal favorite way of doing the montage scene, though, is instead of doing dice rolls, interlude it. Draw a card and tie that together. Now, each player is telling a piece of the montage that sets up the next scene.
What was the I'm not pulling the name correctly. The TV show that was on a while ago. I mean, this is probably 5 years ago, where they were a group of criminals, but they did Robin Hood type stuff, and it always showed flashbacks of how what went wrong was actually planned. I can't remember the name of the show.
It's Leverage.
Leverage. Thank you. So, I mean, you could also do the dramatic task or a quick encounter as a leverage type thing where every success gives them a Benny that they can then spend to say, no, here's what it looks like, but here's what actually happened, and drop the Benny narratively. I mean, there are tons of ways you can do this as far as a flashback. You just have to kind of look at the framework that's sitting in front of you with Savage Worlds and go, how could I use this in an interesting way that's not already spelled out for me in the core mechanic?
There is a way that you could potentially do that with a whole narrative Benny drop. At some point throughout your planning, like if you did it, like going around with what you're saying, Jared, I would say that you could potentially even have the players, and this is stretching it, but you could have the players doing the heist where they're actually cutting in between the planning phase and the execution. And at one point when they switch back to the planning phase, if they wanted to say drop a Benny, it's like, well, the only way you're going to get away with that is if you have an inside man, and the security guard that stops them and that pulls the gun winks and says, gotcha, and then puts the gun back and walks away. Something to that effect.
Well, to use what Dave was saying, I mean, not to dive too deep into creating a new mechanic, but just real quickly off the top of our heads, to do a leverage thing, you would just say, okay, we're running the heist. We're going to interlude it. So we're going to do the interlude. All your planning is an interlude.
Right.
Tell me what you're doing based on the card, which category you want to choose. Narrate it. Here's your Benny. Hold that Benny off to the side. That's now a flashback Benny. At any point during the actual heist, you can drop that Benny and go, nope, here's why that's different. So, for example, you can say my character was in charge of surveillance and figuring out the security rotations. So that was my interlude, and I get my Benny for telling that narrative story how I did it. And then we get to the part where we're breaking in, and we walk down this hall, and here come 3 armed security guards. And I go, hold on. And I drop a Benny. I went, I spiked the coffee with sleeping pills as a flashback. So then we go back in real time, and they all go, stop right there. They all fall over asleep because you've spent that Benny for the narrative choice, but you're trapping it as a flashback and an explanation of why it's going to happen.
Okay.
So, I mean,
again, that's not a creation of a new mechanic. I know when we talked about it back in the Cyberpunk, when we did the whole, campaign creation for a Cyberpunk setting, we talked about a new mechanic to do that. But that's not a new mechanic under Suede. Suede actually lets you just have that control, and it doesn't even have to be the Benny you gained from the interlude. It can be any of your Bennies. It can be used in that manner.
Sure.
So I think, again, Suede really did open up a lot of things that people were already either doing or wanting to do. But for a crime-specific game, some of these things became a little easier because now you have an official mechanic you can use. Though, at the same time, I mean, don't be afraid to create your own mechanics. You know, there's that new conviction mechanic that can be very easily adapted and changed to fit the crime genre as well. You can take the existing rules and create whole new stuff, or you can just go and pull something completely new out of the back of your head that, you know, maybe subverts an entire part of the way the game works. You know, maybe in your game, during the heist, players automatically soak wounds because they're wearing big sets of armor, but in the rest of the game, they don't. Or maybe, you use gritty damage, but only in specific places, because when they start pulling out the automatic weapons, well, gritty damage is on the table. But when it's a knife fight, it's just normal Savage Worlds damage. You can do some interesting stuff to create some setting rules that capture the feel you're looking for, that either reuse or repackage existing stuff or create something completely new. And I'm being kind of vague on the create something new because, well, as a licensee, I want to use any new stuff I think of.
Right.
Stuff I'm going to, put out there.
Well, so for example, right, here's something we've done in Savage Saturday Nights before. You want to have a slightly gritty campaign, but you don't want to use gritty damage, but you want to make it a little bit more difficult. You just change the way wounds work and go, oh, you actually apply your wound penalty and then make your soak roll.
Yeah, that's a bit brutal, but it is.
I mean, it's not quite as bad as gritty damage where every wound's going to cause a temporary injury. It's not quite as easy as, blah, blah, blah. Under the new Suede rules, you can say, hey, look, outside of combat, outside of like a huge, massive frontal assault, wound cap's in place. However, the second you step into the bank for that heist, wound cap is lifted. And if you get hit for 12 wounds, you got to soak all of them. And that would make it more challenging in that specific area. So the kind of thing Dave and I are talking about, Dustin and I are talking about, is play with the rules. Here's the thing that Savage Worlds is intended to be a toolbox. You want to play fantasy, great. Here's tools. You want to play sci-fi, great. Here's tools. You want to do that, great. Here's tools. Here's basic rules. Use them, twist them. They're Lincoln Logs and Legos, and just tinker with it. Play with it. You'll end up, if you start kind of creating your own setting rules and play them, you'll kind of get a feel for what's going to work and what's not going to work. I would just give this caution: if you're going to, blaze that trail and you're new to Savage Worlds, read through the book again another time and make sure there's something that doesn't already do that. Or
something that's going to be broken when you do it.
You do that.
We saw a lot of this previously where people were like, well, I'm just going to do this thing. And it's like, okay, but you do realize how that impacts over here. So you have to be a little more careful with Savage Worlds, I think, than you do with other systems when it comes to that. Just because you do have that trickle down effect. And we see that now with the new stun and the new status mechanics. That's absolutely a reaction to the players who all reacted negatively when they made the change to Shaken, because they saw a lot of the kind of trickle-down effect that had to the rest of the game. And it's like, well, wait a minute. How do you handle all these other things that used to be covered under that now that this is, it's a faster recovery time to make the combats more quick, but it also removes, kind of that crowd control aspect. Well, now we have stun. We have things like distracted and vulnerable that give you that ability to kind of throw a wider net as to the different things you can affect at the table. I also think that go ahead.
I was going to say, I want to make sure, I know Dustin's a big fan of mass battles, and I want to have him talk about using mass battles for heist as well. Go ahead.
Oh, well, all right. So let's view it like this. Mass battles is one of those mechanics that we have not used a lot of that is very useful. So if you were going to run mass battles for a heist, You might set it up as the casino, like we're going to go with Ocean's 8, has 10 tokens, and then the party has 5. And throughout the interlude and the planning, that's how you get the 5 that you have, because you have a very good plan. It's all about the whole prep sessions is building up to have as many tokens as you can throughout. Now, each roll, you're going to have to do stealth. You're going to have to do persuasion. You're going to have to do thievery. But depending on what needs to be called there, it decides whether or not the party or the players win, get to keep their token, or if the casino gets to keep their tokens. And at the end of the whole heist, if the players haven't whittled them down and they don't have taken all of the casino's tokens, then somebody is like, wait a minute, something smells funny. This guy looks familiar. Wait a minute, my cousin was in lockup and he was mentioning, you're Danny Ocean. Speaking of which, I want to parlay off of something here. Going back to what you said a minute ago, Dave, about conviction, you realize that conviction was Danny was running a con within the con, and that was conviction, like getting Tess back.
To a certain extent, I could see that. The conviction mechanic, the way they've got it written up right now, really, to me, adds another thing on the character sheet that you really should be recording, and that is, what is that character's driving motivation that they've got? Yeah. It has to be part of that conviction mechanic. And honestly, I think the conviction mechanic is one of those that should be predominantly triggered by the player putting themselves in a worse situation. One of the great examples they use in the book is the character who has a problem with rage. And every time the player brings that rage up, they get that conviction mechanic to go off. But otherwise, it's not just a hindrance where every time you beat the drum, you get another Benny. It's got to be something that really makes a difference in the game. So I think the interesting thing with using mass battles is, and this goes to the conversation we were just having about, tweak a rule, make a setting rule. You can make an entire mass battle where you never roll knowledge battle, where you say, we're going to do a mass battle for this, but because you guys are trying to sneak in stealthily, whoever the leader is making stealth checks for each round of the mass battle. And then each of you will get your individual actions you can take to, push that forward. And you might have one player who takes the individual action in a mass battle to try to hack into a computer terminal. Or another player might take an individual action to try to silence a guard before the guard can do anything. Because it's all stealth-oriented, you're going to wrap a stealth trapping around that, and you're going to expect your players to wrap a stealth trapping around whatever it is that they have their character do. And you can take that to another level where you can either hand out bennies for each player who does do exactly that. When they give you their own actions, they're wrapping it in that stealth wrapper. Here's a Benny for playing into the trapping of what we're doing. The reverse is, okay, so we're running a stealth-based mass battle, and it comes to your turn, and because you're a murder hobo, every time you decide, I'm going to pull out my gun and shoot a camera or shoot a guard, okay, well, the next round's, overarching roll has penalties on it because you just fired a gun in the casino. That's pretty easy to hear.
Right. And mass battles, if you have not looked at them recently in Suede, take a look, because they don't work the same way they used to. Where, if a character steps up and does something, gets involved in battle, they don't necessarily take wounds.
Yeah.
So pay attention, before you just start to run up, shoot from the hip. We're going to do this mass battle. Go back and reread at least 3 or 4 times the new Suede mass battle rules, because there are changes. So, but yeah, you can adapt those changes. Like Dave was saying, it doesn't have to be a mass battle roll. It could be a persuasion roll. It could be a hacking roll. It could be whatever. It just gives you a bonus or a negative based on the result to your next roll. What Dustin was saying too is you don't necessarily have to do the token assessment from a setup, you can just say, okay, you're going to you're gonna rob a bank. Okay. They've got a security guard, they've got defensive systems, they've got a vault. There's 3 or 4 employees in there, they got a silent alarm. Okay, they start with X number of tokens. And you guys have, what do you have? And kind of suss it up and go, okay, the bank starts with 10, you guys start with 7. Go. So, I mean, you can predetermine that. You can run it. I think it's interesting to run it as a interlude to kind of build up your tokens against the casino or the bank. That's a good, interesting way to do it, or as a narrative, however you want to do that. What about social conflicts as a mechanic in crime? I think here's my favorite example of that is, okay, you're driving home after that. You just done the heist, and your trunk is full of bricks of cocaine, and you're driving it back to the hideout. And now the GM can either do one of these things, like I say, give me a driving roll, and on a failure, woo, you get pulled over for a busted taillight or a moving violation, or I could just GM Fiat. On the way home, you're on the way back to the hideout. Yeah. Hey, the cops slide up your back window. You see a patrol car behind you with the lights on, asking you to pull over. Now, the cop wants to search your trunk. Convince him otherwise. Social conflict, go.
Well, I think that's one direction to go with it. Though I wouldn't initiate the social conflict until the first actual conversation had occurred. The cop walks up to the car and asks, well, did you know you have a taillight out? Now we have the social conflict is going to start. Come up with something to say in response. I think to me, that's a little bit easier because you've already set the tone for where to take the social interaction to the players. It's not like a dramatic task where you can just spring it on the players and go, well, this is a wrapper onto itself that tells you everything about it. No, the social conflict kind of there's a little preamble.
Has to boil. Well, you can always say, too, give me a persuasion roll opposed by the cop's notice so he doesn't sense that you're up to something. Yeah. Or doesn't notice anything. Give him a persuasion roll. Whatever story you're going to tell him. Oh, I'm sorry, officer. I was weaving a little bit. I must have backed into it. I had a couple drinks at the bar. My apologies, sir. I'm going straight home. It's just a mile away. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, give me your persuasion roll.
That's great. And now you're going to suffer the social faux pas drawback.
Or that's
you just said you had a couple drinks at the bar, and the cop is now wondering if you're over the limit.
or it's the lead up, right? Yeah. So the thing that triggers a social conflict is your persuasion roll isn't high enough to beat his opposed notice roll to know you're full of shit. And then if you fail that, then we start the social conflict. There's another kind of way to do it, right?
I think if speaking from a GM point of view, one of the things that I think GMs, if they're going to go this route, need to be aware of is that the police are not stupid. They are going to let you dig your own grave. They are going to let you. That's why every lawyer on earth will tell you, if you come in front of a cop, you just shut up. You just stop.
Hands at 10 and 2, look straight ahead and answer every question with yes, sir, or no, sir.
Okay, it's story time. It's story time. Sorry, I had to interrupt.
Take a drink.
There's a bit from one of my favorite female comedians. And I can't remember her name. She's one of my favorite comedians. I can't remember her name. It's been a long day. But she talks about growing up as a Roman Catholic, and then she's also talking about growing up with her father being a defense attorney. So part of her bit early on is my father was a Kathleen Madigan. There it is. Talk about my father being a defense attorney, and he always used to tell all these stories around the table. And the one thing he always instilled in all of us kids is, if you ever get pulled over by the police, you ever have to get questioned by anyone in authority, you only have 2 answers. I don't recall, and I need a lawyer. Because 99% of people who are in jail are there because they weren't smart enough to shut their damn mouth. So then she goes, and it's kind of weird growing up in a Catholic thing because I would go into confession, and the priest would ask me, do you have anything to confess? And my response was, I don't recall, and I need a lawyer.
So I think, interestingly enough, we've talked a lot about how you can use the social conflict mechanic in the past. as this kind of almost like an opposed dramatic task where both sides are rolling and then you're going to count the number of successes at the end. And it really ends up being the social conflict that you're really doing at that point. We've talked about that pretty extensively about using it as like a dueling mechanic and
interrogation
to do different things. I think, interestingly enough, you could run the entire heist that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that, and we talked about this before we came on the air, is I would resist the urge to use a quick encounter, a dramatic task, an interlude, or a social conflict to run the whole heist quickly and get it done and over with.
Right.
Unless the heist is a tertiary point of the story. If the heist is just something the characters are going to do very quickly so that they can go on and do the epic part of the story, then absolutely drop a quick encounter, drop a dramatic task, drop whatever's appropriate to give it the right weight, and then move on.
Well, let's give an example of that, because that's a very abstract thing we're talking about, right? So let's give it in what kind of genre, what kind of game. What's the example of that? Is that the introductory setup? Is that you hit the Don's casino and didn't know it? Is the result, but it's just a quick encounter for the casino hit?
Well, the way I would put this, as far as like a great example of what I'm talking about, is, again, if we're going to use popular fiction, you could do the heist is the assassination squad at the beginning of Kill Bill that goes into the wedding and kills everybody. So now you have this thing that it's ancillary. It's a supporting piece of information that tells you the greater story of the entire session we're going to run is this adventure about revenge against these people. Now we're going to run a very quick and dirty mass battle that I already know I'm going to set up so that you lose. I'm going to give them 5 times as many tokens as you have. They're going to get extra actions because of their plan that they're, using. They've got the drop on you in the first round. I've set this up to be very much the bloody nose that starts the thing. But it's also meant to be done and over with. We're going to roll some dice. 5-10 minutes later, we're going to be into the meat of the revenge story that we're setting up with this little, heist combat moment.
Right. So it's a teaser to the bigger story.
It's absolutely a heist. It's absolutely that crime and punishment kind of a moment, but it's not the meat of the story. Now, if instead the meat of our story is the Ocean's 11 thing, I am not running that as a dramatic task because it should be the whole session. In fact, it should be multiple sessions to pull off the Ocean's 11 heist. It's the whole point is the heist. That's what everything is in regards to. Now, I might do, like I said at the beginning of this show, where I've got a dramatic task that happens at the beginning of every session that then leads into a whole session that's just an arc behind whatever that initial challenge was. But in all reality, at the end of the day, I'm not going to run a dramatic task or an interlude or any of that as the main part of the story, because that deserves to be more than a 5-minute mechanic at your table. I think you really are doing a disservice to your players if the climax of your game is a dramatic task. Yeah. You can do a lot more where you can run them through, run a combat that doesn't have any combat, but it uses all the other skills necessary to go through whatever that crime is. Maybe it's repair rolls to open up the safe. It's stealth rolls to get past the guards. I don't care what the rolls are, but give your players an opportunity to shine and make dice rolls and utilize their skills and their edges. Don't just make it, we're going to run 5 dice rolls and have it and call it done.
Right. Savor the moment. Make it a slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
So this is okay. So I'm gonna touch it. I'm gonna go here. So At some point or another, no matter what crime and misdemeanors kind of genre you're setting, there's going to be a chase. So let's talk chase rules. Now, can you run that chase as a quick encounter? Abso-freaking-lutely. Can you run it as a mass battle? Sure. But there are chase rules in Suede, and we kind of need to cover that. I know it's not popular. A lot of people like them. They don't like them. The old boy was not any better than the deluxe. Oh, I like the original first edition.
At this point, if you've been paying attention to all the different releases, you've got about 5 versions of the chase rules to pick.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the old Savage Worlds Explorer Edition version of chases. You've got obviously the deluxe edition version of chases. You've got the original Headless Horseman encounter version of chases, the updated Headless Horseman encounter version of chases, and you've got the official Suede version of chases.
Yep.
All of those are okay mechanics to use at your table if you and your players are going to have fun running that chase. And if you're not, it's completely okay to use the quick encounter, the dramatic task, the mass battle. You know, we talked about different ways to run chases kind of ad nauseum, but don't feel like just because we're getting ready to spend the next few minutes talking about the actual chase rules that we're saying you have to use the actual chase rules. You can use any set of chase rules that you want. There's actually a set of chase rules that aren't out there publicly that probably will be sometime in the next year and a half, 2 years that I would prefer. But
so let's talk chases. Here's what I do like about the chase rules. So I think people's expectations need to be managed a little bit about what the new chase rules accomplish.
Really? I mean, I hadn't thought anybody thought poorly or had misunderstandings about the chase rules.
Well, let's expound on that. The thing I think that you, as a player or a GM in a new Savage Worlds game using Suede and using the rules as written, the chase rules as written, is you need to understand something that it's a abstraction of a tactical tabletop vehicular combat. It's giving you cards for positioning and tracking, and those cards have automatic range increments built into them because 9 times out of 10, everybody in chase ends up leaning out the window and firing guns. Or I'm chasing you down the street, I'm throwing knives. There's this huge range thing, and the abstract roll on a random table thing went over like a lead balloon because people could not wrap their heads around, wait, I was at short range the round before and now I'm at long? What the because they were thinking of it as scene to scene to scene, consecutive seconds strung together, instead of what the deluxe chase rules were kind of trying to accomplish was the Jackie Chan Hong Kong theater montage chase at different locations and points in time through like a crowded street market. That being said, that is a good mechanic for what it's trying to accomplish. It makes it very easy for your players to look at where they are in the chase versus where the opponent is in the chase and fire a gun with the right penalty. It makes it very easy. However, some of the maneuvers get a little bit cloudy. I'm like, wait, what? I can do this? It's like, huh? How do I? What? So, Dave, as the rules maven, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit, and ask your assessment of the maneuver options, just to give a brief explanation of what maneuvers accomplish in the new chase rules.
So, I think the best thing I can say about maneuvers right now is that while we're all learning to use them, because I think the biggest part of this is there's a lot more options. You got a lot more things in that list than you've ever had before. you're going to have to play in a lot of sessions with a lot of chases to use each of them in the most appropriate moment. You know, it's that old Captain Jack Sparrow thing of you have to wait for the moment. And if you don't hit it at the right time, well, you just wasted that and done something stupid instead. With that said, the big thing to remember with the chase maneuvers is you have to keep in mind, outside of the abstraction of the chase, what is your actual goal? You know, if you're trying to catch the other guy, you're never going to use the dropping back maneuver. It just doesn't make any sense for you to drop back unless for some reason you've got something that has like a minimum range on it where you can't launch it because of that. But even that, to me, you're probably, if it's a chase and not a vehicular combat, you want to catch them. So you're not going to use the drop back maneuver. There's little things like that. Like you can immediately start to kind of disregard some of those maneuvers because they don't make sense for what you're trying to do. At the same time, the other thing to remember with those is you can use these in very creative manners. You know, the boarding action is absolutely 100% designed for like ship to ship piracy type maneuvers where I'm going to throw a grappling hook up into the sails and swing over to the other boat. But you absolutely could use the boarding maneuver to jump on their back in a foot chase.
Mm-hmm.
Or
jump to another vehicle, which you get parallel to.
Car. You know, the most recent Indiana Jones movie we have is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I know a lot of people weren't happy with that one, but it's got one of the best chase scenes in it, where you've got multiple characters in multiple vehicles doing things like jumping between vehicles, fighting from vehicle to vehicle. It's a classic use of something like this, where you've got some pretty defined range increments. You know how far people are from each other. So when someone decides they're going to use the big machine gun on the front of the truck, well, you know how far it is to the next truck. So we don't get into the old chase rules worry where now you say you're going to go and unload on them, but I don't know how far away you are. Or you say you're going to jump to their vehicle. Well, are you close enough? Well, you drew this card, but they drew that card, so what does that do to your range increment? Well, now you know we're this far apart. I can either do it or I can't. So that's the part where I think the current crop of options really shines. I think in a lot of ways this is stuff we were already all doing, but everything resolved as it's a trick and did it shake them? Right. And now you have a lot more options from there.
Right. And there's a lot of options too, where you have the option to do it as a free action or do it as a concentrated action that consumes your turn. But I mean, there's that choice as well. So here's the thing. I think that the more we as a community of savages, if we start embracing the chase rules and sort of looking at them as a onion and with multiple layers and options, a group of savvy players working in concert can wreck a GM's chase quickly. I mean, just with the so your character's doing what? You're going to board? Okay, so how about I ram them, and then on your action, you jump on board. If they coordinate their efforts in this chase and make some smart choices and get some decent dice rolls, they can wreck that chase in a couple of rounds.
And remember, because they act on a single initiative card, when they're grouped together, you can have players set their own order of action. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we're all acting on the same initiative card, but Jared's absolutely going to act before I do because his action's going to benefit me. And then my action is going to set up what Dustin's going to do next.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's how you do it. You work in tandem. And I think that's one of the sad things is people don't think to work in tandem anymore.
Yeah,
What?
they're just taking all as like individual. I'm gonna take an individual shot. What are you doing? I'm taking cover. What are you doing? I'm taking an individual shot. Nobody does the distracted, test. Nobody's doing, any of that kind of stuff. I don't see that happen a lot with role players in general. It's
Well,
not just something with
even prior to this, the most often I ever saw it come up was the single player who did the, I'm gonna push him prone, I'm gonna, taunt him about his mother, and then I'm gonna curb stomp him. Well, that's all well and good, but now you're suffering penalties to those actions. Whereas if Jared pushed him down and Dustin taunted him about his mother, I can come along and curb stomp him at no penalties and all kinds of bonuses because of what they've done prior to me. And that was the aspect of teamwork that you saw was kind of missing from most of the time that you played Savage Worlds. It was there, it's built into the system, but players kind of become almost glory hounds for it. And I think that's an interesting moment where, as a GM, start playing with the synergy rules that were really presented in the Superpowers Companion. Start playing with giving players a bonus or a Benny when they do work in tandem like that. Find a reason to get your players thinking of teamwork. And the best thing to do that is to show them that it works.
Right. I think that's one of the things is if you have a face character that has a really good taunt skill, and then that like, let's say that they're quick, but instead of being quick in terms of being quick in agility, they're a quick thinker. So that's what they would have the quick edge for. And then to have a really high taunt, so they taunt, and then the character is shaken, but they're really just doing that so the big tank of a guy gets a chance to sucker punch him. That's how it works a lot of the time in reality.
Yeah. So take a look at chases. Don't be afraid of them. Keep running them. It'll eventually, you'll get to an epiphany moment of, oh, I finally get it. I finally get it.
And I will say, I had to read chases, I want to say it was 4 full passes before I got to where I was even comfortable with the idea of trying to run one. And even now, I know I don't know everything there is to know about those chases.
Right.
It's why I seem a little uncomfortable when Jared put me on the spot. I was like, I'm not really there yet. But, we said this in the green room, is Suede is still new enough. The concrete's been poured, it just hasn't set.
Yep. So let's get, we're getting nearing the end of the hour. I want to kind of touch on, how do you do this without any rules? How do you run a heist without quick encounters or a dramatic task or mass battle? Or how do you not lean on a mechanic to pull off crimes and misdemeanors as a genre? Let's say we're talking about, it's more of an investigative game where every once in a while they're going to, tick off somebody in a high position of power and then they're going to come after them. But it's pretty much them hunting down clues that lead, that trail of breadcrumbs leads to the big bad. How do you run that without mechanics, special mechanics?
2 things immediately jump to mind, and they are diametrically opposed opposites. One is, before you sit down to run this for your players, come up with a complex scheme. Villain A hurt Villain B by doing X that Villain C knows about, but Villain B doesn't know that it was Villain A that did it. And Villain D is complicit in what Villain A did to Villain B. Villain C knows that as well, and is now blackmailing Villain D to do something to the protagonist that ends up being the inciting incident that drags them into the scheme. Now you've got this complex scheme that feeds itself like the Ouroboros dragon eating its own tail, and you've got a reason for your players to be running in narrative circles trying to track down what actually happened. You can feather that in with different challenges and whatnot to go back to using some of the rules, but you've now set a narrative arc for this that really kind of touches on the way crime kind of happens, in that, you know, the big bads don't ever get their own hands dirty. That's what the hired help is for. But unfortunately, no one can keep their mouths shut. So the hired help has run off at the mouth so that the other big bad in town knows what was going on. And rumor mills and all that all play together. So you can set that up as this big, complex, interwoven spider web of a narrative. The diametrically opposed option is take copious notes during the session and then riff off of every little thing that happened to create a complex situation out of what your players are doing. And the way I'll kind of put those two on a post is, if you've watched Altered Carbon on Netflix, that is the first thing I talked about. That is a complex set of this person did this person wrong while they did this person wrong. Everything's interwoven so that by the end of that show, there's not a character that hasn't been touched by this complex spider web. They're all interrelated and interconnected. And you set that up before you even started the game, and your players are just kind of fumbling in the spider web. Mm-hmm. The opposite one, where you're kind of riffing off of each thing that happens, is more a Guy Ritchie film. That loosey-goosey, the players are going to make mistakes, and that mistake becomes another thing that comes up. That the way, you know, Snatch or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels or any of those Guy Ritchie films play out is based very much on a kind of a domino effect collapse of everything the players do have this additional thing that it also knocks the next domino over. So they find themselves in a never-ending spiral of interesting situations.
Right. And here's one thing I want to really reinforce and drive home about clues. You don't hide them. The clues, finding the clue is not important necessarily enough to require even a skill roll, in my opinion. Because the ultimate goal of the clue is to lead them into a scene to find another clue. That finding the clue is not that big of a deal. Tracking it down and where that leads them, that's where the story is. So don't worry about, well, is it a notice roll to -2? Do they only find this thing with the raise? How do I blah, blah, blah? You just walk, you could just as easily as a GM go, okay, so you walk into the hotel room of the murdered prostitute. What do you find? And just pick up their narrative and go, absolutely. You find a matchbox, or you find a match, what do you call them? It's so old. Matchbook. Yeah. You find a matchbook. Is there anything written on the inside? If so, what does it say? Well, it says Lucy's. Great. Give me a common knowledge roll to figure out what Lucy's is. That's how you do it. You don't hide the clue. The clue is given. It's free. It's open. It's where it leads them that requires the rolls or the persuasion or whatever else when they get there.
Now, I will say, if you're doing the complex version of what I talked about earlier, the basic clues are free. The bigger clues are hidden behind some kind of a challenge. Not necessarily a dice roll, but they're hidden behind a challenge to find where everything's interconnected.
Right.
The big thing to remember with clues is there's really kind of 3 shades of a clue. The first clue is the basic stuff that the players have to have for the story to happen. If you want to run a murder mystery, the very first thing you have to just give to the players as a clue
is a body.
You can't run the murder mystery if you don't have that inciting clue to say there was a murder by showing the dead body or the murder weapon.
Right. So the bonus clue that requires the notice roll into that situation, Dave, would be what? You're at the crime scene and you notice somebody in the crowd staring at the body, whispering to somebody, and then whispering to a cop, and then walking away.
Hold on. So The you must give it away clue is the dead body. The you're probably going to give it away clue is how did they die?
Right.
And then the big hidden clue is off to one side there's a shoe print in the blood. And that required a notice roll to spot the shoe print, because the shoe print's not necessarily going to give anything away, but it will give the players one more piece to put that puzzle together when you start dropping enough of those that they might be able to skip some steps to get your big interwoven spiderweb figured out. That's what those are. They're hidden Easter eggs that lead to things, and those are behind a challenge or a dice roll.
Right.
The other two types of clues are pretty much always out in the open, though they might require that the player, the first one is always given. The second one might require a player say, well, look the body over. Then you can tell them how the character died. It's not behind a challenge, it's just behind a player action. The third one is behind a challenge of some variety. And those clues need to be few and far between, and they need to be a big jump forward in the process of solving whatever the thing is, because you want to make sure everything they need to play the game is free.
So if they go too far astray of the mystery and they're completely way off course, one of my favorite things to do is have thugs show up and beat the crap out of them and indicate that they were too close to something. Or like, hey, Mr. Big sends his regards. Why don't you go back to Kansas after they've beaten the shit out of him? Because that did generate maybe causes the characters to go, okay, wait, there was that clue about Mr. Big. Okay, we're obviously on to something. I mean, there's different ways to kind of steer it.
I consider those almost a red herring moment where the players have gone down the wrong rabbit hole. It's still a rabbit hole, and it still leads to some pot of gold that's deep down under there that's interesting. But it's not the one they were looking for. So when the guys show up and beat the heck out of them, they then wake up in a death trap that once they escape, they can obtain the pot of gold down that rabbit hole and immediately realize it's the wrong rabbit hole. And it didn't really solve anything, but it was a fun night at the gaming table. And next week, I guess we'll backtrack and figure out where we lost the track of the actual mystery.
Right.
So I think the big thing there is give them kind of a denouement moment. Give them a finale for that extra path they've woven, so they know they're on the wrong trail, because it's not just gone cold, but they've actually found something at the end of that trail.
Right. In the same vein, you could have somebody come up behind them and Suede with a knockout, a knockout blow, the drop. They're gonna go down, and and you just narrate. The last thing you see is the guy with the blackjack, and he's got a very intricate, unique tattoo on his wrist. And you can describe that tattoo.
You see red high heels walking away as as everything fades to black.
As you hit the ground and everything goes tunnel vision. Yeah. So I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it, but I think eventually you're going to have to do clues and things like that in any kind of a crime mystery or crime genre type setting. There's going to be some things you're going to have to research to find and figure out.
Let's talk about the biggest tropes you have to include.
Betrayal is one of them.
Yeah,
in my book, betrayal is a big trope that has to be in there.
I mean, that's what crimes and that entire seedy underbelly are really about. Everybody's trying to get ahead. You absolutely are going to get stabbed in the back.
Right. And so, like, one of the best ways I like to do it is the most unassuming character, somebody they trust implicitly, who basically just gives them all the information they want. And then as their step, they go, oh, have a drink with me. Let's talk about this. Have a drink with me. And you narrate the entire thing. And then you go, you stand up and you feel incredibly woozy. And you look at your drink and you notice that he hasn't been drinking his drink. And he looks at you and goes, sorry, pal, they paid me a lot of money.
See, at first when you said the most unassuming character, I thought you were going Kaiser Soze on me there for a minute. The most unassuming character is the one that's actually guilty. But no, I like that. Another one that I really think you probably need to weave in, and this is a twofer. It's the honeypot and the femme fatale.
Yep.
Yeah, the love interest. Yeah.
They will kill you.
And to be fair, in the modern parlance, it doesn't necessarily have to be a female femme fatale, but it's that character that comes off as unassuming, very
naive and innocent,
and could never be involved, and then wham, they turn out to be the professional assassin, despite the fact that they look like Shaggy. And then the honeypot is obviously your character gets drawn into a love interest that really was just a trap. Yeah. Whether it's something that's going to draw your character into a blackmail scheme, or they're going to try to convince you not to go after it because you have to protect the new love interest, whatever it is. And again, these are old school terms that are based in the ideas of a previous bygone age. So we have things like the honeypot and the femme fatale, but they don't have to be gendered in the way that they have been in the past. You can still use that trope in your game, regardless of what kind of a gender you're dealing with. You might have a cast of all female characters. The best femme fatale there is going to be the big hulking guy who then is clumsy as an oaf, doing everything wrong. He's big and hulking. He's beautiful man, but he's completely oafish and stumbles over his own 2 feet. But also, by the way, is a trained assassin that is doing that as a setup. He wants you to think that he's no good.
I think the other thing in a good crimes and misdemeanor type campaign or adventure is the final big score. This is my last ride, boys and gentlemen. We do this. We're free and clear. We've paid off everybody, and we can go retire on an island. You need to present like the big score. The final
I love
score.
the retire on an island, on their own island.
Right.
They all have this island out there somewhere that they're gonna buy at the end.
Right. Or it could just be like it could be just like I want to open a bar. That's all I want to do. I want to buy my local bar and bartend and enjoy the last 25 years of my life in luxury and peace.
Oh, we were talking in the Dead End play session this past Friday night about guilty pleasure shows that we've watched, and that's the Gecko brother in the TV version of From Dusk Till Dawn. His ultimate goal was to buy a bar out in some seedy beach, I want to say in South Florida. Through the entire show, they constantly reference this bar he was going to buy.
Yep.
And I mean, it was a horrible show. Don't go watch it just because I made this reference. But it's completely and totally incongruous with the lifestyle you see the character leading, and they're going to be a beach bum owning a bar.
Yeah. I think the other big one that goes hand in hand in anything is going to be the getaway. Yeah, you have to have the getaway, whether that's a foot chase, whatever that is. If you pull a heist, you have to have the getaway.
So what about the corrupt cop and the good cop?
That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
I think you need both. I think you need a corrupt member of law enforcement, or a corrupt city council member, a corrupt member of authority, and then you need the straight arrow Boy Scout cop that is just out there to stop crime, and they might even side with the player characters by the end of it because they find out that the player characters are the little fish that have been eaten by the big fish.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like Training Day was like that.
Yeah.
Like the whole premise of it is the guy was effectively a good cop for a long time, but then he became very corrupt, and when he became corrupt, he became corrupt.
Yeah. He didn't do anything in half measures.
He was a whole ass kind of man.
I really like the straight cop version that is so straightened by the book that when they get, pardon the cliche, free donuts and coffee from the local vendor, the straight cut, we can't accept that. We need to pay for that. We can't just accept free donuts because we're wearing a uniform. That's an abuse of the power. It's almost like bribery. He's bribing us. We can't do that. Oh God, relax. It's a donut.
And here's the thing I will say regarding that specific trope. A lot of people are going to say, well, you're talking about crime, and how do I work that in if my players are playing the mobsters? Well, they're walking through an area, and then you describe two cops standing at a Roach Motel, street vendor getting a cup of coffee and donuts, and the one cop is dressing down the other cop about accepting a bribe that was donuts and coffee as
right.
You're just inserting them in the scene. They have no impact on the player characters unless the player characters are dumb enough to do something to draw their attention. But you've just inserted that trope into your game as a little throwaway comment that because it's a trope of the genre, because it's what's expected of the players, it'll drive that thought process of immersion deeper for them. They're going to buy into the game heavier because now you've got a game world that feels alive around them, even if it's not interacting directly with them.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of the bait and switch as a thing that is kind of integral to a crime scene.
Dry hole. They crack the safe and there's nothing in it.
That I also like the idea that you're meeting in a public place at a pretense, but it's really to get them alone to assassinate them. It's the Godfather thing where they've stuck a gun in the tank in the toilet, and you're having this special meeting, and everybody thinks they're safe, and you're there really to assassinate them. It's a bait and switch. It's no, we'll all sit down in a public place and make a peace treaty. Yeah, and then excuse me. I have a nervous stomach. I need to go to the bathroom. And you come back out with a gun and blow everybody away. Bait and switch. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the heist. It could be about something else completely as a secondary part of that story. But bait and switch, it kind of falls in with the betrayal and everything else. I mean, those are all pretty much classic.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the chronic loser. In a crime thing where this is the guy who
the chronic loser, to me at least, is probably one of the tropes that's being played by one of the player characters. That is probably the role that a player character has taken on. That they're just that guy that is constantly caught the short end of the stick.
Yeah, I think Henry Hill in Goodfellas is the chronic loser of that story. Yeah. He's just drawn into it. He's never really caught a break. Everything goes wrong for him. He can't win. No matter how hard he tries, he's just born to lose. All right. Anything left in the chat we haven't discussed?
Ruben mentioned that sci-fi seems to love the smuggling version of crime. I think that is absolutely one of those tropes that gets hit on a lot, because sci-fi almost always involves some additional form of travel. So smuggling becomes a whole new avenue. I think you could just as easily fit that in, obviously, in like a pirate game or something of that nature. Even like a Deadlands Noir, smuggling could have been any kind of illicit substance. You could fit smuggling in, but absolutely, I think it fits best in a sci-fi game.
Yeah. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. Sorry, Dustin. I'm going to mention the faded SW. So please try not to get excited or incited. Star Wars is a crime and misdemeanor film. The rebels are the criminals.
Definitely not a misdemeanor. I tend to think galactic treason falls a little bit higher. Yeah,
treason is above a felony. It's not a misdemeanor.
More on the crime side of it. They're the criminals in that story. They also have to be the heroes, but technically they're the criminals.
I mean, I have got the thing on my Facebook page, and I've said this for years. It's that classic idea of the farm boy who was radicalized to become a terrorist by a dirty old man who uses the death of the farm boy's parents while the parents were in possession of stolen property that belongs to the government that's holding top secret plans that the dirty old man is trying to get into the hands of a rebel cell who, you now have this boy that's swept up into galactic terrorism because of that. Like, it's a very classic version of crime from a certain point of view.
Right. All right. So on that note, we'll wrap this episode up. So until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Dustin and Dave saying keep rolling and stay savage.